It's a very good morning to the Global Travel Channel, to Andrew Zunica. Andrew, how are you?
Great, thanks. How are you?
I'm fantastic, thank you very much. I was just saying off air, we've got a beautiful sunny day where I am, and we've got light winds, which when you're on a sailboat is a good thing, I can tell you that. Have you done much sailing in your life?
Yeah. Not a lot of sailing. Did a bit of boating and when I was up in Hamilton Island for about 6 months.
Right.
Spent a lot of time on the water, but not sailing, not yachting. No.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
I'd love to try. I'd love to do it.
If you ever get up to this part of Australia, then let me know, and we'll get you out on the boat and show you a little bit of sailing. It's a great thing to soothe the soul, especially when there's a lot of virus around and all that sort of stuff. Talking of which, whereabouts are you talking to us from today?
So I'm in Melbourne, in the depths of our renewed stage 4 lockdown. So it's been a couple of weeks. We were in a stage 3 lockdown for about 3 weeks, and now we're about 2 weeks into a stage 4 lockdown, which is pretty severe for us. We've had a nightly curfew for the first time in Melbourne's history. So from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. we're all stuck inside. And previously I was still partially working from the office, but now I'm working from my apartment full time. So it's pretty full on. But we're halfway through, so hopefully not too much longer to go.
Yeah, let's hope so. And for everybody listening around the world today, we're going to over 97 countries today around the world. So Melbourne, Australia, we're talking about. The capital city of Victoria in the state of Australia, which is in the southern part for those of you who are not too familiar with Australia, but that's where Andrew is talking to us from today. Andrew, you are guest number 160 on my show today, so congratulations for being a round number anyway. I can guess we can give you kudos for being
that's a lot of shows.
Round number. Now, as I usually do with my guests, I offer you the opportunity to dedicate your show to someone special in your life. So who would you like to dedicate your show to today?
Oh, God. That's a good question. I think I'd probably want to dedicate this to my mum. Okay,
fantastic. What's your mum's name?
Her name's Sharon.
Sharon. Okay. Well, Sharon, this is for you, this show. That's very special. And when's Mother's Day? I don't even know. Has it been or gone? It's gone, has it?
No, it's just gone. It's in May. It's about a week before my birthday. So
okay.
It's I think it's the first Sunday in May in Australia.
Okay, so we can't send it out as a Mother's Day gift, but we can send it out as an everyday gift, can't we? So,
as a cheerio, she'll get a thrill from it. So
fantastic, good stuff. Well, this is to you, Sharon, as well, from the team at Humaneity, and your son's dedicating the show to you. So that's very cool. Now, when you sent me some stuff before the show about yourself, you'd mentioned that you've been on ABC Radio in Melbourne before as one of your star guest spots there. So I wanted to throw a challenge out to you today. I want you to let me know, and all the people listening today at the end of today's show, whether this was more exciting than being on ABC Radio in Australia. Yeah. So
okay. Yeah.
That's the challenge that I have. And you also said in your notes to me when you reached out that you are approaching your 40s as far as age, I'm assuming, yeah?
Well, it's still a couple of years away, but I'm a bit of a planner, so I'm not too far. I'm not too far away.
So I wanted to ask you what's it like to be approaching 40 these days? Is it a good thing? Have you got a specific plan on how you approach 40s or what?
I think I did have a plan on how to approach 40, but I actually think in the last 6 months I've learned through this recent crisis or this recent situation with coronavirus that plans can pretty much get tossed out the window. Anything longer than a couple of days at the moment for where we are anyway in the world is a long time. So as I said, I've always been a planner. I've always tried to look 3-month plan, 12-month plan, 5-year plan, and it's been good to have that sort of focus in the past, but it's also, I think, been a little bit limiting. So one of the things I've definitely learned is just to focus on today and not plan too far into the future. I guess you've got sort of big ideas around, where you'd like to be at certain critical milestones in your life. But those ideas, as I said, they've either changed significantly or they've sort of been pushed aside, and let's just see what happens, I guess.
Yeah, good attitude. What zodiac sign are you? star sign?
I'm a Taurus.
You're a Taurus. Okay, well they're pretty well.
Yeah.
They're pretty well known to be
end of
planners.
Taurus into Gemini. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you've got a travel bug as well with the Gemini side of you, of course.
Yes, yes, definite travel bug. Ever since I was young, we travelled a lot with my family, but within Australia, we were in Queensland a lot. We had family in SA and had family in New South Wales and in the Sunshine Coast. So we used to travel a lot as kids, and I think some of my favourite sort of memories were about not being at home. They were about being away with family and friends and experiencing new things. So I've always had that travel bug. And but one of the things that we didn't do when I was a younger was travel outside of Australia. And I think over the years of childhood into adolescence, it's sort of this desire, this urge sort of built up in me that I needed to get out of Australia and experience something different. So I kind of hit it off with a bang, and ever since then I've been, wherever I can, I've been traveling.
We all cherish our childhood and family trips. Do you still do trips with your family today, or are those are things of the past?
Yeah, look, they did drop off there for a while. My sister and I sort of, you get older and you do your own thing and you move away from home, and you have your own requirements and your own, things that you're paying more attention to, I guess. But one of the big things we recently did as a family trip was my mum's 60th birthday, and that was the first time we'd done anything as a family group for probably 10 years, like a significant holiday for 10 years. And we actually went back to Hamilton Island, which is where I used to work, and my family came and visited me there quite a bit. So there was a lot of memory connected to that place. And we stayed in a large house there for a week, and it was probably the best family trip that we've ever done.
Yeah, so, fantastic. It's always good to go to the last one. It's always good to go to places where you've been and to take other people, isn't it? And it's even more special, I guess, when it's family as well, where you can show them the lay of the land, but you can also reflect on past times that you've had there as well. That's great.
Yeah, and we actually had a trip planned for April, May of this year. We were planning as a family to go to Hawaii and Vancouver, but obviously so we didn't get as far as booking it, but obviously that's going to need to be put off for a little bit.
I think a lot of people around the world had trip ideas booked or planned, and those things have fallen by the wayside. Now, you say that you prefer a good documentary over a movie. So what are a couple of your favourite documentaries?
Look, I think anything by David Attenborough is a favourite of mine. I think, I've said to you in my notes, I've sort of watched him. I grew up with him. My mum was a huge fan. My grandparents were huge fans. So that was our go-to whenever we wanted to sit down and watch something as a family. It would usually be a David Attenborough documentary. So I pretty much grew up listening to him, watching him travel around the world. And I think that's part of what inspired me to want to reach out and explore places. So anything by him is great. I'm also a big fan of like a political documentary where people are sort of looking into the way certain cultures and countries and organizations and political systems work in different regions around the world. Can't really think of any, like one specific one off the top of my head, but I also find that fascinating. Sort of leads back into part of the reason why I travel, which is to experience how other people live and how their cultural systems have developed over time.
Have you done much research on Australia's history? Seeing you're a person that's living in Australia and you're born here, I guess. Were you born in Australia? I'm assuming that.
Yeah, I was. I was born here. My parents were not. My mum was. My mum and her family were born in the UK, and they moved to Australia in the 60s. And my dad and his family were from a small town in south central Italy, and they moved here in the late 50s. But I was born here first generation. So I have done a little bit of research on Australian history. I think now is a pretty interesting time because I think a lot of what you learn growing up, a lot of what you learn through school in Australia was all about white colonial history, and it sort of ignored First Nations people and Indigenous culture. So I think there's a lot more recognition of the extent and the breadth of that culture going back 50, 60,000 years as a minimum. And I am becoming a lot more interested in that. So So yeah, I think I have sort of started to get my teeth sunk into that. In terms of Australian sort of history, I really am very fascinated by how cities developed in Australia, particularly Melbourne, where I'm from. I think that the story of where Melbourne has or is now positioned in the world is a fascinating one. From the first sort of settlement here through to the gold rush and the boom times, and then the bust in the 1880s and 1890s, and then federation right through to Melbourne being the capital city of Australia, and then that moving to Canberra and the Olympics in '56, and then all the way through to the years of the '50s, '60s, and '70s, which were a bit of a let's say Melbourne was probably a bit of a sleepy sort of town, and then through '90s and into the 2000s where it kind of boomed and has become this big international city that I love so much. So yeah, so that, I guess that's where my focus is.
Yeah, that's great. It's good that you take the time to do that. I think a lot of people would be quick to get on a plane and head off around the world to find out about other cultures before they even do a lot of research about their own country. I was only reading yesterday actually and researching for a show I'm doing tomorrow with a guy who's walking across Australia at the moment, and we're going to be talking a lot about the history of this country and pre-1700s when the original landowners were here and before they got invaded, and lots of interesting conversation coming out of that. So I'm pleased that you're doing that, because I think it's always something good to do, is to have a sound history of your own country. Now, you say you value travel more than any object that you own. Why is that?
Because I think the experiences that you gain from travel are practically endless. I think investing in objects, while they're great, they serve a certain purpose. A house puts a roof over your head, a car to travel, and clothes and all those other things that people sort of invest in a sort of. They're important, but travel is the opportunities and the experiences that I've had from travel are completely endless, and they have long and enduring effects on the way that I've sort of lived my life and the way that I've approached different scenarios and settings throughout my life. And I think that will continue on for the rest of my life. So while I'm not suggesting that certain things or having certain objects that may have sentimental value or that may provide you with enjoyment are a bad thing, I think if I was to rate the two, the experience of travel would definitely sit far above all of those other things.
What did you do when you left university? What was your first step after uni?
So I had a year off between high school and uni. I think, like most people, I just wanted to get out and work. I just wanted to leave home. I wanted to live in a house that wasn't the family home. So I kind of did that and decided to go to uni the first time to study journalism, PR, professional writing. And I did that for a couple of years. And while I was at uni, I realized that once I got out of uni and got a job and started to sort of settle down in Melbourne, it was going to be really, really difficult for me to get away and, just disappear for a year or two or whatever, which was deep down what I wanted to do for many, many years. So I started saving while I was at uni, and I formulated this plan to, instead of sort of, doing some sort of mundane job in Melbourne, I thought, well, why not start that travel experience as soon as uni's over, move somewhere within Australia where I could work and live and meet a whole lot of international people, understand the sort of tourism and hospitality sector by working in a resort or in a hotel space, and then save money at the same time and plan for my overseas trip. So the first thing I did when I finished uni, I did my exams, and then a week later or 2 weeks later, I was on a plane to Hamilton Island, where I lived for a while.
Fantastic. So you got out of the cold of Victoria and headed up to the Sunshine State.
I did.
I want to go back to something you said, because I find it quite amusing at some levels, because a lot of people say, before I started a career and got stuck in that, there's only one person that gets us stuck in a career, and that's ourselves, isn't it? You've always got the choice every day to leave and go off traveling and do whatever. A lot of people out there listening today are people that have quit their jobs and gone traveling around the world and changed their lives as a result of it. So people, please don't think you get stuck. You don't have to get stuck at all. You can just buy a plane ticket when you can next time, and you can go away. Now, Hamilton Island must have been a pretty cool place. If you don't know and you're listening around the world today, Hamilton Island is up on the Great Barrier Reef area. It's a gateway to paradise. It's a place where a lot of Australians, let's say if you've got a little bit of money, you go there and play and have a nice time. It's not only a domestic destination for holiday, but a lot of international people come and stay on Hamilton Island. What were your first impressions of that part of the world, Andrew?
Well, I'd never actually been to Hamilton Island before, but I'd been to the Whitsundays and I'd been to the northern part of Queensland a lot. It was like the kind of the go-to place for our family holidays. So I was really familiar with that part of the world. So I knew I knew what to expect. But I think from an environmental point of view, I kind of knew what I was going into, the barrier reef and tropical rainforest and all those sorts of things. But I think the thing that not surprised me, but that I really responded well to was the sense of community on that island, and the fact that there was just as many staff and people living on that island as there were holidaymakers and tourists. So there was two parts to the island. There was the resort side of the island, and then there was the town sort of side of the island and the airport. And the staff quarters, I was lucky enough to be in a really great position between those two places, in the staff quarters sort of between the resort and the town centre. And there was a real sense of community among the staff members there, and that I really responded very, very well to, and very quickly got settled into the groove of island life. So,
was it a lot of young people working there? Was that kind of the demographic as far as your fellow colleagues?
Yeah, there was a lot of people from, say, between the ages of 18 who had just left school, probably up until your mid 20s. I think I would have been maybe 20, 21 at the time. So I was kind of right in the thick of that demographic. But there were also a lot of people who had been living there for many, many years, who'd lived in staff accommodation for already 5 or 10 years. And it was 15 or 16 years ago that I did this now, and I still know one person who's living there as a staff member all these years later. So I had, being a planner, and this comes back to one of those things where, sometimes planning is great, but sometimes it's not. I only planned to be there for a certain amount of time. And at the end of that time frame, I really regretted the fact that I'd limited the amount of time that I had there, because I felt that I just really understood how to live on the island and really understood how to get the most from it. And I felt like I'd ripped myself away from that a little bit. And it was really sad to leave early. So that was an early lesson for me, that planning isn't always the best way to move forward. But yeah.
Have you taken that on board since then? Have you planned less?
I think it's really hard for someone who is an inherent planner, who it's kind of in your DNA to think about things, or you've been brought up to think about things down the track in the future, to make decisions now that are going to have a positive impact on your future, to sort of set yourself up. And I think that comes from certain cultural backgrounds and the way that I was brought up, particularly from my father's side of things. Make sure you've got a plan, make sure you save your money, make sure you buy a house, make sure you do all of these things, and life kind of follows a set kind of track. I think it's pretty difficult to break that down, and to not fall back into that trap of planning. And I think I've done a reasonable job of it, but I don't think I'll ever be able to completely get rid of it.
Let me play devil's advocate, if I may, for a second then, because the future doesn't exist, does it? Like we've only got the now. You might be planning for something in 3 years from now that's never going to happen, because you might not be here. Yep. God forbid, but
exactly.
All these things, and I think we've got a lot of people running around the planet that are planning for a future that doesn't exist, and retirement is one of those things that comes to mind. A lot of people say, "Oh, I'm going to travel the world when I retire, and I'm going to see this place and see that place." But then what happens? They end up with a hip replacement, or they might be even in a wheelchair, and they can't get out of the country. So, live for the now is probably the way to go, right? Now, I want to talk to you. Next about what happened with all those great savings that you made from Hamilton Island, because you had a mission to book yourself a ticket and take off around the world, didn't you?
Yes, I did. It was always, something that I wanted to do. I think from like early teens, I was like, okay, as soon as I can get out of Australia, not that I didn't like living here or experiencing this, but as soon as I can, I want to get out and experience all these amazing things. I'd seen my family travel outside of Australia. my family go back to Italy, for example. I wanted to experience all the things that my mum and her mum spoke about, London and the UK and all of these things. So it sort of built up for a long time. So yeah, I was on Hamilton Island and I saved as much money as I could there, and within that time frame that I sort of set myself. And then yeah, once I hit a bit of a target, I was like, right, it's time to go. So I booked my overseas trip, and I booked a round the world ticket, and I had a bit of a vague idea of where I wanted to travel to and at what time I was going to be where. But there was a lot of gaps in between, and how I was going to get from one place to another and who I was staying with and what I was going to do was completely up in the air. So it was the first time that I'd really just let go of all of those instincts to plan and just sort of thrown myself into something pretty significant. It was the first time I'd been outside of Australia, and the first time I traveled alone. So
how did that feel leading up to the trip, where you had, left yourself a lot of leeway in terms of not planning certain things? Did it make you feel uncomfortable?
No, I was excited by it. It wasn't a sense of discomfort at all. I think looking back on it now, I think, what the hell was I thinking? And if I had have told family and friends exactly what my plans were and what I was doing, I think they would have told me I was absolutely mental. So I think maybe being young and a little bit naive, I thought that it was a great idea. If I was giving myself advice now, I think being more of my parents' age at that time, I probably would be a little bit cautious of my kids doing the same thing as I did. But at the time I was like, no, this is what I have to do. There's no option. I can't. I didn't have the time or resources to sort of plan anything that was much more structured, and I also didn't really want to. I just wanted to go out and get lost, and that's exactly what I did.
So for people listening and watching today, let's talk about the process. You decided that you were going to travel the world in a fairly unique way back then, in those days, and that had a little bit of risk attached to it. So tell us about what the plan was in terms of how you were going to get yourself around the world.
Well, I didn't really know exactly how I was going to get myself all the way around the world and to try and go to all of these different places that I wanted to go to. I had, as I said, limited resources and limited not necessarily time, but I certainly had limited resources. So I was funding it myself on the savings that I'd made from a six to 8 month stint in Hamilton Island. So you can sort of imagine it's not huge amounts of dollars. And I was doing the night shift one night at Hamilton Island in the comms room. That's what that was my job towards the end, where I'd sort of manage communications in and out of the resort. It's a really great job, actually. Anyway, I was doing an overnight there, and I'd purchased a couple of Lonely Planet books, the actual book, and I was reading through, and there was a section in the back of it that had handy links to online sites that might be able to assist you. And let's keep in mind, this is before iPhones and before there was none of that, no Facebook, none of that. So I was intrigued by this website that I found called Couchsurfing, and I logged on to Couchsurfing, and I started to research it during my night shifts, and then I realized it was this amazing network of people who were willing to host you as you traveled your way around the world. So luckily I found this quite a few months before I was due to leave Hamilton Island and start on my trip, and I during those night shifts in Hamilton Island, when the phones weren't ringing, I would plan my holiday and sort of map out where I wanted to go, and then I would start to reach out to and talk to all of these incredible people around the world, and started to make some plans for where I wanted to travel in certain countries. So yeah, and it was a relatively new site. I think it was founded in 2002 or 3, and I came across it in 2005. And yeah, I've been a member of that ever since, and it basically allowed me to extend my travel experiences, one, and two, it also allowed me, or it gave me the opportunity to have genuine travel experiences and connections with people and places and cultures that there is absolutely no way I would have been able to achieve having traveled on my own or stayed in hostels or hotels.
Yeah, right. I'm always fascinated to know how people go about their planning of trips like this, in terms of, you hadn't been overseas before. You were saying, right, I'm basically throwing a dart at a dartboard or a map of the world and deciding where I'm going to go. Were there any places that kind of stuck out that you said, right, I've really wanted to go to this place for a long time, or I've heard a lot about this place?
Yeah. So there was the obvious highlights that I needed to tick off that list, and the first two were the places that my parents came from. I really, really wanted to go back to those countries and understand what life was like there, and how they grew up, and how their experience of life there, and then moving to Australia, sort of formed who they were, and then essentially ended up forming who I was. So definitely the UK was a big one for me, and Italy was my my number one. I think in terms of a destination of experiences, that's a tiny country packed with the most incredible history and the most amazing cities and cultures and languages and art, and it's just the most densely populated country that I've ever experienced, I think, in terms of European history anyway. So they were definitely on my list. I also really wanted to go to Canada. I was in a relationship at the time with someone who had come from Canada, and we had assisted him to migrate to Australia through an interdependency visa situation at the time, which again was very new, and I really wanted to go and travel through Canada. So North America and Europe were the two key continents, and from there I sort of planned. I think the next step for me from there was to plan how the logistics of getting a around the world ticket and where that would take me, and then Europe I didn't want to do it by air. I wanted to do it by bus and train, and walking. So that was all about understanding the Ural system and sort of pinpointing where I wanted to go there.
We're talking about a little bit of time ago, so I'm interested to know, what was a round the world ticket valued at back in those days?
It's actually not that much different from what it is today. I think at the time as well, I was lucky through Couchsurfing. I met someone who worked as a travel agent, and so they assisted me with the planning and organisation of this ticket. And I think from memory it was about 3,000 Australian dollars, which for me at the time was huge, but it's probably about the same price now, I would think. And that got me from Melbourne to about 10 or 15 different destinations, and then back to Australia. So
let's talk about the United States to start off with. Is that where you went first?
Yeah, so my first international destination was the US. It was actually Hawaii, and I remember leaving Australia on the 31st of May and arriving in Hawaii on the 30th of May, thinking that was like pretty incredible. So landed in the middle of the night, and the very first night away was my first couch surfing experience. First couch surfing host, a guy named Max who worked for Hawaiian Airlines, and he met me at the airport, picked me up, and I ended up staying in Hawaii at his apartment for a week. And because he worked for Hawaiian Airlines, he got free flights. And one of the things that he offered me was a free flight from Honolulu to the Big Island of Hawaii. And we had this incredible 24-hour journey from Honolulu, flying to, I think we flew into Hilo or one of the other airports, and we hired a car, and within 24 hours we drove around the entire island and trekked across the volcanoes in the middle of Hawaii, like an overnight trek. So we didn't sleep for like 36 hours, and that was day 2 of my international trip, and that wouldn't have happened without couch surfing. So I would have probably ended up staying in a backpackers hostel in Waikiki Beach and doing not much else, just doing the standard backpacker thing. But that was day 2 out of an 7-8 month trip, and if you extrapolate that out across 6 or 7 or 8 months, you kind of get some sense of the benefit of couch surfing, and the impact that had.
Fascinating destination is Hawaii, and a lot of people go there not even knowing that Hawaii itself is the big island that Andrew is talking about. And if you do go to a place like Hilo, or Kona is the other airport on the big island of Hawaii.
Actually, I think it was that one we flew into. Yeah.
Okay, grab yourself a car, head on around the island, go to the pineapple farm. The Dole Pineapple Farm is on the big island of Hawaii, and I can tell you, if you like pineapple lumps, which is a heritage of us Kiwis, we love pineapple lumps, you can find them in spades there on the big island Hawaii. So I'm really interested to know though, what's the psychological feeling when you're going into a couch surfing arrangement for the first time? Are you nervous? Are you scared? Are you worried? What are the emotions attached with that?
I think it depends on how the arrangement was established, whether you knew that person beforehand, in that you'd communicated with them for a significant amount of time prior, or whether it was a very last minute, off the cuff kind of encounter. So some of the places that I stayed, I'd emailed them months earlier when I was in Hamilton Island, and we'd had a really great level of communication it was all by email back then. So we'd had a really great level of communication, and I felt like I knew that person and I could trust them when I met them. And those people I usually stayed with for longer periods of time. But then, some of the experiences where I was literally in a internet cafe again, because that was the only way to access the internet then. I was in an internet cafe on Couchsurfing, going, far out, it's 4:00, I need somewhere to stay tonight. Let's see who's around, right? And so those ones were a little bit more. I wouldn't say I was worried or anything, but those sorts of encounters are a little bit more. You don't feel as confident, I guess, that you're going to get along with the person or whatever. They were usually much shorter term encounters, and might I add, some of them were. The vast majority of them were incredible. Some of them not so great, but it's all part and parcel of it, isn't it?
So do you think the introduction of social media has helped couch surfing become a little bit easier from a management point of view and get to know people?
Potentially. I think social media has had a massive impact on every single thing that we do and every single experience that we have. So I often wonder if, when I did this world trip, if Facebook and iPhone and Instagram and all of those things were available when I did it, would the trip have been a different experience? And 100% it would have been a different experience for so many reasons. And so I'm kind of glad that I did it before all of that happened. Because I think it was a much more, how do I describe it? I think it was a much more solitary experience. I didn't feel like I didn't have the opportunity to just get on my phone and flick photos across the world and share them with my family and friends and stay connected. It was a solitary existence for me when I was doing that. I had to ring home on a phone card from payphones, right? Like there was no connection. And I look back and I'm really, really happy, and I'm really glad that there wasn't that connection, because I think with that connection, you tend to want to go back to what you know, and you tend to want to reconnect with things that are familiar to you, and that make you feel comfortable. And I didn't have that option. I was constantly outside my comfort zone, and I constantly had to use my brain myself and think about what I was doing and where I was going, and experience and take in everything surrounded by. So yes, I flop between being really critical about the impacts of social media, really, and thinking that it is a really beneficial thing. I think it's like most things in the world. It has its great benefits, but it also has its great detriments too.
Yeah, I'm glad you talked about that in relation to travel, because I've been saying for years that everybody's been saying in these current times that travel's going to change forever. It's never going to be the same again. Well, it changed forever when social media came along as well, and people haven't probably recognised that to the stage where we're posting, every man and his dog's become a photographer, and they want to post everything about every holiday. I can guarantee you, as you've just explained, that people's travel experiences are vastly different and probably more narrow-minded than they used to be in the good old days when you used to have to use a payphone. I'm glad that there's somebody around still that used to use the payphone. But yeah, that's the whole thing, and we as a species, we evolve, and so does the travel industry. And when we look at it in that context that you just explained, it understands why. Tell us about what happened when you got to mainland USA. Where did you go to from there?
So my first destination in mainland US was LA. So I got a flight from Hawaii into LAX, and it's really funny what you remember about these trips, actually. I remember my first cab ride from LA airport to the hostel. I hadn't actually found a host in LA, and it was one of the very few times that I stayed in a hostel. I stayed there for a couple of nights. And I remember being in this cab with these American people who, from California who were about my age. And I just remember listening to their conversation. I was on my own and I was sort of asking, oh, what do you do? Where are you from? And I sort of explained that. And then they went off into their own little world. And I remember listening to their conversation thinking, wow, like we're the same age, we're the same demographic, but far out we're different, and that was just a 15-minute cab ride conversation. So, but anyway, I got to the hostel and I actually bumped into or met some people who lived 2 streets away from where I grew up in Melbourne. And again, you kind of you sort of drawn to what you're familiar with. And at that early stage of my trip, I was like, okay, these guys are going to be great to hang around with. So we did a bit of traveling around LA, and we got a bus to Vegas, and we did like that sort of glitzy part of the country, and then from there we went to the Grand Canyon, and spent a couple of days at the Grand Canyon, and then back to LA, and from there I traveled to San Francisco by bus, and I had my second really significant couchsurfing experience in San Francisco with a couple of guys. I stayed there for 10 days with them and had an incredible time there. And then from there, I went up into Canada, and that's where I met my partner at the time, and we set off across Canada by car and bus.
So back to Vegas, can't let Vegas go without a mention. So coming out of Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, into the glitz and glamour of the Vegas Strip, how was that? First impressions for you in Vegas?
It was bigger, I think, and glitzier and more outrageous than I had expected. I remember we were there only for a couple of days, and I remember we did a massive night crawl, like up. One night we went up one side of the strip all the way and went into as many places as we could, and then the next night we went down the other side of the strip, and we hung out around, I can't remember the name of our hotel was near the area in Vegas where they've got that big roof with the lights. I can't remember the name of the strip. So we hung out in those areas, and it was definitely full on, but I realized pretty early on that this was the kind of place that you go to for 2 days, and that I don't think I'd need to get back in a hurry. The Grand Canyon, on the other hand, was somewhere where I just got a very small glimpse of, and I do want to go back and spend a significant amount of time there at some stage of my life.
Did you go to the Hoover Dam?
I did, yes. Yeah. That was a pretty incredible place for a number of reasons. I'm obviously in design. I've always had like an interest in architecture. This was actually before I went to design school. I did this trip. But I was fascinated by the engineering of that place and the juxtaposition of the natural environment and how, man's intervention within that space completely transformed that landscape. So I found that fascinating. Also a little bit upsetting as well, but it was visually a stunning sort of place.
Did you stop at a small place called Barstow on the way to Vegas?
Barstow. I don't remember stopping there.
Barstow's the home of the world's tallest thermometer.
Oh,
you didn't see that? Okay.
No, we didn't stop there.
So for everyone listening today or watching, if you're going to be heading from LA to Vegas, and make sure you stop off in Barstow. It's a 2-horse town, but it has the world's tallest thermometer, and it's usually sitting around 100 degrees every day, so it's pretty warm out there. You took a bus to San Francisco. Not many people take buses across the United States. How was that experience? Was it a Greyhound or another brand?
Yeah, I think no, it wasn't a Greyhound. It was a private shuttle bus that sort of ferried tourists or backpackers mostly between LA and San Francisco. So it was like a minibus. I think it was I can't remember now. It was like a day, across the course of a day trip from LA to San Francisco. I think I wanted to sort of stay grounded as much as possible, because flying, I did want to obviously fly when I needed to get places quickly, or travel long distances where there wasn't that much in between that I wouldn't really needed to see. But I wanted to stay on the ground as much as I possibly could. So I took that bus because, the coastal drive between those two places is pretty amazing. Not that we saw that much of it. But yeah, I think you just get a much better sense of where you are when you're at ground level.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a fan of travelling on the ground. I love both buses and trains. I think it's a great way to get across a place. Plus, you generally end up with a little bit more leg room if you're a tall person and able to spread out a bit. San Francisco is one of my favourite cities in the world. You got to spend 10 days there. What were some of the highlights of San Francisco?
Highlights of San Francisco for me was its setting. I think, again, I'm constantly being interested by urban planning, architecture, and the way that sits within the landscape. I think San Francisco was a really incredible space, like a city. It's very hilly. There's lots of, there was a bay. There's these incredible engineering structures. There's two big bridges, the Golden Gate and the other one.
Bay Bridge,
Bay Bridge, that's the one.
Yeah.
The architecture of the city was fascinating to me. It did remind me a lot, actually, of home. It reminded me a lot of Melbourne because of the trams and the Victorian architecture and streetscapes and those sorts of things. So I felt comfortable there very quickly. The people that I was staying with made me feel very, very comfortable, and they sort of took me under their wing a little bit and showed me around, which was great. So San Francisco was a great city, and it was one of the longest lengths of time that I spent in any one place. Apart from Italy at the end of my trip, where I spent a significant amount of time, months. But yeah, 10 days was about the longest I would stay anywhere.
There's some significant sites in San Francisco as a city. You're referring to some of the architecture. The Transamerica building, which is a very pointy staple building, is a beautiful building in San Francisco. Been there for a lot longer than people think too, actually. Did you get out to Alcatraz? Did you get out to the island and have a look around?
Yeah, I did. I went out to Alcatraz. That was pretty fascinating trip. But I think the thing about San Francisco, again, I like to walk everywhere as much as I can, and I spent a hell of a lot of time wandering around San Francisco and wandering around the streets and looking at the terrace house sort of architecture, and I came across this tower called Coit Tower.
Coit Tower, yeah.
On a hill, sort of outside of the city, and I went up in that area, and I had the view from up there was fascinating, and I found that to be really, really special. I also remember going down at Market Street and then getting to the end and all the walls along the bottom and all the seals that kind of live in the middle of San Francisco, which I found kind of fascinating. So yeah, that was an experience too. And then my hosts, his name is Nick. We ended up driving he took me outside of San Francisco to Sausalito.
Yeah.
On the other side.
Yeah.
So we've got a ferry there, and then he had his dad and family lived outside, a couple of hours outside inland. So we went on a drive out there and got to meet them and hang out there too. So yeah, I feel like I discovered San Francisco, and I'd definitely like to go back there.
Yeah, it's a great part of the world. It sounds like you must have been close to the Napa Valley and Sonoma Valley area. Do you remember that? Did you go there?
Yeah, I think that was it. It's funny, like there's these tiny little intricate details of things that you think that you'd forget that you remember like it was yesterday, and then there's these major sort of names and places that you kind of or people even sometimes, and you just draw a complete blank. But yeah, I think it was into the valleys.
Yeah. Okay. So then off to Canada and tripping across Canada with your partner. So how was it traveling with someone after spending some time alone? What did you actually prefer?
Well, I did enjoy the solo travel, even though I didn't feel like I was traveling alone, because everywhere I went, I had someone, to stay with. And I think the hosts in the US were actually really, really hospitable, and I didn't feel like I was traveling alone. I was excited to see someone that I knew when I made it to Canada. So that was a really exciting experience. And Canada was the first time actually that I drove. The host that I stayed with in Vancouver lent me their car to go and pick up my partner. His name is Steve. From the airport at the time, and they're like, just take it. I'm like, I've never driven on that side of the road. They're like, oh, you'll be fine, right? So they lent me their car, and I'm like driving on the wrong side of the road to the airport. And yeah, it was good. It felt like a bit of a reunion, and I was excited for the next leg of the trip because I'd heard all of these incredible things about Canada and all these places that Steve had grown up and grown up in and been to and had family in, and we were about to experience that together. So that was exciting. So we drove. We actually hired a car and drove from Vancouver to I think it was we drove to Calgary. So through the mountains.
Through the Rockies,
we also dipped back down into America for a day because Steve had never been to the US. So we just went across a border town. I can't even remember the name of the town, but we just crossed the border, got completely hassled by the border cops on the way into the US, and the Canadians kind of just like waved us through.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was an experience. Kind of got taken out of the car and taken into rooms and interrogated. And why are you going into America just for like one day? And you know, what's in your luggage, and search the car and all this sort of thing. Anyway, then we ended up going to Calgary, and Steve had an auntie there, or cousin, and we bumped into some people in a bar who Steve and I had spoken to online from Australia like years earlier, and they didn't know we were coming, and we didn't know they even still lived there, and we were in a bar and they were sitting on the table opposite us. So that was an incredible experience just to bump into these people. And we ended up spending quite a bit of time with them, and we went out to another fascination of mine was when I was growing up was archaeology and dinosaurs. So we ended up going out to Drumheller and the skeleton fields up there and doing all that, which was pretty awesome. And then from there we ended up going to Saskatoon, Toontown, which is the place that Steve was from. So that was pretty exciting because I got to meet his family.
Right, wow, amazing stuff. So did you go across all of Canada? Did you end up on the other side?
Yeah, so
Montreal,
We
Toronto.
got a bus from Calgary to Saskatoon. I spent a couple of weeks in Saskatoon, and that's where I said goodbye to Steve. And then I flew from Saskatoon to Toronto, and I spent some time in Toronto. Then I went to Montreal, up to Quebec City, and spent quite a bit of time in that kind of area before coming back down into the east coast of the States.
Pick up a bit of French along the way, did you?
Interestingly, when I got to Montreal, I kind of, in my mind, I was like, oh yeah, they speak French as a second language, but they actually speak English as a second language. And that fascinated me because it was the first place that I went to where English was not the first language. And I didn't expect to experience that until I got to Europe. So that kind of smacked me in the face that no one actually spoke, no one spoke English, or they didn't want to. And so I wasn't expecting that then. I was expecting that much further down the trip. So I found Montreal fascinating and really beautiful city, and Quebec City also pretty amazing. Had some great experiences in that part of Canada as well. Went back down to the border, Niagara Falls, all of those areas. I stayed in Toronto for quite a bit, but I think I liked Canada. The whole country was amazing, but I did really find Quebec to be probably my favorite part. Yeah.
So of the places that you've talked to us about so far on this episode, what ones are kind of at the top of the list to go back to and see a bit more of?
Oh God, I think definitely want to go back and spend some more time in and around the Grand Canyon. I think I just sort of scratched the surface. I saw it, I was awed by it, and then I left. So I feel like I need to go back there. There's definitely areas of Canada that I would go back to. And I would love to, so of the places that I've done so far, Hawaii, I want to go back to the Grand Canyon, San Francisco, and parts of Canada. So most of it.
Sounds like another round the world ticket coming up to me.
Well, that's part of where I'm heading.
So let's dive over to Europe quickly and go through some of the highlights of Europe. And I'm also interested to know what are the cultural differences between couchsurfing in the United States and Canada versus couchsurfing in Europe, if you can touch on some of that.
Yeah, I think I think that people who are drawn to couchsurfing in America are quite open about things, and they're trusting, and my experience was that they were very similar to, they would have approached couchsurfing in the same way as how an Australian or a New Zealand person would approach couchsurfing. If you're the kind of person that's going to put up your couch and invite a stranger into your home, you're pretty relaxed about that happening. Whereas I think in Europe, some, not all, but some of the couchsurfers that I stayed with were much more reserved about that, and much more the opposite of trusting. They were a little bit more cautious about having a stranger in their home. Some, not all. I mean, my absolute most of my incredible couchsurfing experiences happened in Europe. But I did also spend a lot. I couchsurfed. The majority of my couchsurfing was through Europe, and I spent a lot of one or two night sort of stays with complete strangers in the middle of goddamn nowhere. And so, yeah, there was a big difference between those 1-2 night met at the last minute kind of crazy night out, drunken night out sort of stays, and then the people that I actually stayed with longer term.
I guess that those that were cautious had probably housed Australians or New Zealanders before you arrived and understood
Possibly.
What they were in store for you. I can imagine
Possibly.
that trailblazers before. So of the destinations that you went to in Europe, what were some of the standouts as far as places and things that you got to see and do?
I just, where do you even start? I think I spent probably 4 to 5 months overall in Europe. The UK was a really interesting experience, not what I expected. Look, I would definitely go back there, and I met some amazing people, but I think my favorite experiences were definitely in continental Europe, where the cultures and the languages were so different, and I really wanted to completely immerse myself, particularly in Italy, but also in places like Spain and France. So I found them really, really fascinating. The first place I went to in Europe was the Netherlands. So that was like a bit of a taste test into Europe, but it wasn't that crazy, chaotic, southern sort of European experience that I was kind of expecting. It was much more sedate, much more ordered and organized. So yeah, I did enjoy that. But I think my favorite places, or my standout places there the number one surprise for me actually was Portugal. I spent some time in Porto, and I wasn't really even planning to go into Portugal, but I ended up getting there after an extensive train journey. And Porto was one of the most valuable experiences of the whole trip for me because of the place that it was and the people that I stayed with. In Spain, Spain was amazing. Barcelona was incredible. But again, it came back to the couchsurfing experience that I had that made the best place in Spain for me was the couchsurfing experience that I had in southern Spain in a town called Malaga, or Fuengirola it was called. It was near Malaga in southern Spain. So kind of nowhere that you would normally go as a tourist, but I connected with someone online on couchsurfing. I ended up going there, and it was the most incredible experience. I actually was going through some photos preparing to have a chat with you today, and I found some photos of that family that I stayed with, and I flicked them off to her on Facebook yesterday, and we had a bit of a laugh about that. And then, of course, Italy was incredible. The entire country was amazing. It blew my mind, absolutely blew my mind. And I crisscrossed my way from the top right down to the bottom. I spent maybe 2 months there, and I ended up going to where my grandparents and my dad was from, and I stayed with an extended sort of family there for the last month of my trip before I ended up coming home. So Rome blew my mind. Venice, everything in Italy was incredible.
It's an interesting aspect that you raised there about the experience being related to the people that you stayed with and how that kind of impacted your impression, I guess, of the places that you're at, and also the fun, I guess, you had while you were there as well. No different than people staying in hotels. If you get a good hotel, it can make the experience much more nicer. If you have a bad hotel, absolutely similar. What about the differences in food from, tripping across the US and Canada and then going to the European palette, so to speak? How did you enjoy that, or not? Did you prefer one or the other versus US, Canada versus Europe?
Oh, I absolutely preferred Europe. European food, that's what I grew up on. My grandmother, my nonna's an incredible sort of cook. She still to this day creates dishes and meals that I've never seen, and that are just incredible. And so I was part of the reason why I wanted to go back there was because of food. I've always had an interest in food and cooking and hospitality. And a lot of that actually did come from, spending a lot of time growing up with my grandparents. They had a veggie patch out the back, and they had a little room under the house. And my grandfather was a baker in Italy, and so he built a wood fire oven underneath the house that I basically grew up in. And they had salamis, and he made his own wine, and we'd do tomato days and all that. So I'd experienced all of that Italian food culture, and so for me it was that was a huge part of what I wanted to experience when I went to Europe. So hands down, the food scene and the food experience was incredible in Europe. I wouldn't even put it in the top 10, I don't think, of the experiences I had. I wasn't in the US and Canada for that, I don't think. So I didn't really seek out a food experience there, whereas in Europe I definitely did. Going to little, I was on a shoestring budget, like a ridiculously tight budget. So it's not like I had the opportunity to go to fancy restaurants and things, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to try and go into places where tourists wouldn't necessarily be. Even though I was clearly and obviously a tourist, I still wanted to go into those places and find these little, in Spain, for example, I remember going to little places where you'd go down some steps and sort of behind a door, and there'd be this little bar, and you'd have these little tapas things, or a euro each, and a beer was like a euro as well. And I'd sit there and I'd spend €5 or €6, and I'd have this incredible food experience that I think, from my perspective, it far outweighs any sort of fine dining experience that I could have had, I think.
Yeah, good point. Now, for somebody that's sitting down watching and listening to you today, and they're interested in doing this whole couch surfing thing, what would you throw out there as some of the top tips that you can now reflect on after your journey and kind of say, well, I would have done this a bit differently and made it a bit more effective maybe?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think I engaged with couchsurfing in a number of different ways, and I don't think that there's necessarily a good or a bad way. I think it sort of comes back to what kind of experience you want from your trip, and how much you want to get involved with the people that you're staying with, and how much of that connection with local people is important to you. I think if that is important, then perhaps try and engage with people as early as you can and start to build a bit of a relationship with them before you arrive. I think those experiences were far greater than the message them today and stay with them tonight sort of scenario, obviously, because you've built that relationship, and generally I'd stay with them quite a bit longer. So I think, reach out to people, be honest with people, let people know what you want. And one of the things that I found fascinating was that I didn't have these ideas of when I'd go to a city or when I'd go to a place that I wanted to tick off all of these touristy things necessarily. Some places I did, but most of the places I stayed, like Malaga, for example, I didn't. I just let myself go, and I let the person that I was staying with treat me to their experience or their understanding of where they live and what their culture is. And that for me was probably the most beneficial thing about traveling in that way, just to let it go. Don't go and think you're going to tick all these things off, and don't have a pre-planned kind of list on this day you're going to do that and this day you're going to do that. Just let yourself go completely and just let the host guide you, I think.
Yeah, good advice. Looking back on the trip now, you were away for around 10 months, I believe. What was the outcome as far as what impact did it have on you as a human being and the way that you viewed the world?
At the first answer to that is fundamentally changed my outlook on life forever. So, probably the single greatest impact on my life was from that trip. I think at the time I didn't realize how much of an impact it had. So when I got back, it was amazing. I was in awe of the whole experience. But towards the end, I remember thinking, okay, I'm tired now. I've backpacked my way around the world on a shoestring budget, and I needed to have a break. So I was kind of almost relieved. I remember touching back down into Melbourne Airport and seeing the Melbourne International Airport sign and just sort of like crying a little bit, because I was like, I'm home finally, and it felt amazing to get home. But with each passing year that goes by, I think I look back on that experience and realize how unique it was and how formative it was, and how much of an impact all of those experiences have had on my life and the decisions that I've made the whole way through. So I don't know if I can pinpoint one particular thing. It's probably it's had an impact on everything that I do. I think it's becoming more and more apparent the older I get how much of an impact it had, and how lucky I was and how fortunate I was to do that trip at that time within that period of time. So, yeah.
And
I think that's part of it. I'm going to continue, I think, to benefit from that trip all of those years ago. Like that investment of time and energy into that is going to continue to flow on throughout the rest of my life. I've come to realize that.
You've obviously stayed in touch with a lot of the people that you stayed with. How are those relationships going today?
So I've stayed with, give or take, Couchsurfing hosts. It would have been 36 or more. Some of them, as I said, were quite quick visits. Some of them were longer visits, and I've made lifelong friends with those people. So the lady in Malaga, for example, who I spoke to just last night, I still have a really great relationship with her. It's not like we pick up the phone every month or whatever, but I know that she's there, and I know that I have always wanted her to know that what she did for me at that particular time and the experience that I had there reinvigorated my trip and got me through the last 4 months, and that without that person, I may have cut my trip short. I may have gone on a different journey or not had the energy to kind of finish off what I wanted to. So there's that relationship. My friends in Rome, I've got some incredible friends in Rome who I've traveled with since then, who I've hosted in Australia, friends in San Francisco, my friend in Hawaii. Yeah, so there's out of all of those trips, there's probably a dozen solid relationships that I still have to this day, people that I travel with, people that I've hosted since I got back, people that will come to Melbourne and I will show them around, and people that I will continue to do that with going forward. And I'm trying to set my life up in a way that I can do more of that for those people and for others.
Yeah, brilliant. What's your next travel plans once we're all able to get our passports out and get off overseas? Do you have something that's a low-hanging fruit as far as a destination goes that you want to get back to? There's
so many. I think I was very fortunate to just before lockdown, towards the end of last year, I went to Iceland, and that was a destination that I'd wanted to go to for a very long time. But it was interesting because I didn't at the time, sort of towards August-ish of last year, I was like, I'd love to go to Iceland, but I kind of got myself into a rut thinking, well, that's like a long-term destination. That's somewhere that I've got to plan for and all of this stuff. And then something snapped in me, and I went into talk to a travel agent about booking some tickets and bits and pieces. And I thought, no, I'm not going to do Iceland. We'll go to Japan. And then I walked out with a ticket to Iceland, and I was on the plane 3 weeks later, and off we went to Iceland. And that, apart from this world trip, is now the number one trip that I've ever done. And it happened within the space of 3 weeks. I was there. And I'm so grateful for that, because now I look back on it and go, well, if I didn't make that decision and I decided, no, I'll do it next year, well, I wouldn't have gone. So that was an incredible trip. I'd love to go back there, but I think the next destination on my list is Japan.
Okay, yeah, well, there's a lot to be said about going to Japan, as there is Iceland. I think I'm going to name this episode, Andrew, Less Planning and More Spontaneity with Andrew. I think that's going to be the right name for this episode today, right?
Yeah.
We've rushed through our time. It's been great chatting to you. You've shared a lot of information about your travel experiences. I said to you at the top of the show, though, I wanted you to give me a rating against the ABC Melbourne show that you're on. How did I go?
You did really well. You asked some really, really informative questions, some sort of hard-hitting questions. You made me really think about my experiences, and I hope I communicated them well. So I think you did. I think you did really well. And this was definitely longer than that. I think that was a 5-minute interview. This is in an hour. So yeah,
very good. Well, I'll keep myself on for another week and keep pumping out the Global Travel Channel episodes. Andrew, it's been an honour having you on the show today. Thanks for sharing your life journey with us, from Hamilton Island to all the places around the world that you have spoken to us about. It's been great having you on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I've had a really great time.